Thank you and welcome to another episode of Geek USA, an all things nerd podcast where the Trekkie meets the Techie. My name is James.
And my name is Carl.
And this week we're going to discuss Dream Theater's third album, the dark and brooding masterpiece that is Awake. While initially deemed a commercial disappointment at the time of its release, Awake has grown to occupy a special place in the hearts of many Dream Theater fans. Where the band's major label debut, Images and Words, had kicked the door wide open, Awake featured a road-hardened Dream Theater in the midst of solidifying their sound. The album features some of the band's heaviest moments and most thought-provoking lyrics. The last record to feature Kevin Moore, Awake is in many ways the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Alright, so Carl, this week we are discussing Dream Theater's third album, Awake. So we did Images and Words. We kind of skipped over When Dream and Day Unite. I think most fans would kind of consider Images and Words the place to start the conversation. So Awake is their second or third album, depending on how you look at it. What are your initial thoughts on the album Awake?
This was, I believe, the first Dream Theater album that I remember getting and listening to. And
good first album.
Yeah, and unlike a lot of what was told to me of progressive rock, unlike a lot of what I would hear by then, this was a lot heavier, was a lot darker. The lyrical content was awesome, where as much as I like progressive rock, I mean, you're never really knowing progressive rock for amazing lyrical content. And of course, you know, the musicianship was fantastic. It was sad that, you know, this was the last outing we were going to have with Kevin Moore, because I love that guy, and you can hear, I know he's not on this as much, but you can kind of hear the atmosphere that he brings to it, and I thought it was a good counter to the the instrumentational masturbation that we get out of everybody else. Not that I mind, but yeah, no, this is a fantastic album. This is the kind of thing that I wish they would go back to in my, if I was from my entitled fan aspect, but great album. Can't say enough good about it.
Yeah, I mean, Awake might be their best album. I think that whenever you get into the discussion of like what's Dream Theater's best album, this album's always at the top of everybody's list. It was at the time, I knew Dream Theater, as the band that put out Pull Me Under, and this sounded so different in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of people were taken aback, and the record, when it was released, it came out October 4th of 1994, so, you probably remember 94, I know I do, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, these were the bands that were kind of ruling the charts, and so Dream Theater drops this album called Awake, and it kind of, it got decent reviews, and it sold okay, and got some little airplay, but it didn't really do much, and it was considered a failure by the record company, but, in retrospect, it's probably the album that has the biggest cult following. Everybody knows Images and Words. Images and Words went gold. Images and Words had a huge radio single that was all over MTV. Awake didn't have any of that, so, it's one of those records that I think the perception at the time, in the mid-90s when I was getting into Dream Theater, this was like the dark horse album that I kind of just discovered, working my way backwards from Falling into Infinity and Images and Words. But it turned out to be the album that I liked the most and liked the most for a long time. It was probably not until 6 Degrees came out that I started to feel like, oh, well, here's a new album that I might like the most. Do you have any thoughts, looking back now, on where Awake sits versus when you first listened to it? How many Dream Theater albums had been released?
Oh, when I first listened to Awake, only 3. So I first was listening to Awake when Falling into Infinity came out, and you recommended this was probably the best place to start. And you were like a year and a half older than me. Well, you are. You weren't just then. You are now, too. You are a year and a half older than me, and back then that's what you suggested. And then I listened to the other two just kind of on my own time. The first new album that came out that I was aware of when I was a Dream Theater fan, like it was a Scenes from Memory. That was the first time a new one came out that hadn't been released since I'd been a fan. So I don't think any different of this than I do now than I did then. I hate to say it, but with Dream Theater, I think I'm one of those fans where the snapshot of what I loved about them kind of ended, I guess, in my 20s with 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, and this was like the whole leg of the band that I kind of defined was my favorite, and that hasn't changed. Everything else since then to me has been kind of a second phase that I just wasn't that into as much. This is probably my second favorite album of theirs, and it's been that way, I think, since I've heard it.
Wow. So that's saying something. Before we go back and kind of dig deeper into the album, let's give everybody a couple quick snapshots of where we were at. So Images and Words, like I said before, had been a huge hit for the band. The band goes back in the studio, and this time opts to not work with David Prater, who they had not had the best working relationship with while they were working on Images and Words. The record company loved the fact that Pull Me Under had been such a big hit and wanted the band to explore that direction more. John Petrucci was like, sweet, I just bought a 7-string. Sounds good to me. The band is teamed up with John Purdell and Dwayne Barron, who, notably had just worked on, Ozzy Osbourne, No More Tears. For those who don't know, John Purdell, that's him singing harmony with James LaBrie on voices. So they were a very hands-on production team, a completely different style, and the band really clicked with these two guys. And it really, it really pushed the band to kind of explore every avenue that they wanted to, as opposed to just kind of trying to make the record as quickly as possible. So I think the results kind of bear out that way. The other interesting thing about Images and Words versus Awake is that Awake has a darker tone that the band very famously has reflected on and said, the tour was long and hard, and when they came back and got into the studio to make this record, their lives were in different places. And so this album kind of reflects a more mature, I think, worldly view lyrically, as well as musically. So do you think I got everything there? Is there anything I'm missing?
No, I think you did get everything. Isn't there a rumor I heard where Mike Portnoy has a copy of No More Tears where I think John Purdell did a demo of all the songs, like the vocals?
I believe I heard that somewhere. Yeah, the dude was a great singer. And that, when you're working with a producer and you're a young band, I think having somebody that can kind of get in and maybe make those quick suggestions, like, hey, this song, like, maybe, like, you guys should modulate in the chorus, just like little things here and there, like a la Bob Rock with Metallica. I think it probably really helped. I feel like in a lot of ways this album is even more song oriented than Images and Words, and there are noodly sections, but it really, for the first time and probably the last time, it just feels like a collection of like hard rock / metal songs. This is probably Dream Theater's trimmest album, even though at the time it was nearly 80 minutes. It doesn't feel that way to me. So, I mean, the
songs were trim. They weren't. Yeah. It's not like they had these obvious sections where you're going to do the whole band lead thing and then just this lead thing and that lead thing. It seemed like the songs, like individually, were it's not, I don't know. It's not like their stuff sounds structured, but you can kind of like listen and say, oh, this is where they're going to do this thing. Where Awake didn't have those points to it. They had noodly parts, but they seemed to just kind of flow in and out of one another in just more of a song fashion as opposed to we're just going to do something progressive for progressive sake. Not that that's a bad thing, and not that I necessarily think that they did that on Images and Words, but I mean, you can definitely tell that there were points with Images and Words where, that may have been like a vibe that I picked up on. So yeah, trimmer songs. They had that. They had the 3-part. That trio of tunes, the Erotomania voices and the Silent Man, which I guess you can kind of the Mind Beside Itself trilogy, where you can kind of consider it maybe one long progressive track, which I don't, but I guess you could. But I would say you're right. Trimmer, not necessarily short.
Well, let's dive into this. Let's go all the way to the beginning. So the record starts off with what, in my opinion, is one of the most recognizable drum fills ever. You know, just a really, really cool, quick little tom roll that kind of leads us into 6 o'clock, a song that Kevin Moore provided the lyrics for. And it's, probably the most notable thing about the song is it has just this wicked organ part that kind of works as a counterpoint to John Petrucci's riff. And man, you're about 1 minute into this record and you hear that 7-string guitar come in, and it is instantly the heaviest thing Dream Theater's ever done. What are your thoughts on 6 o'clock?
Yeah, it was an amazing opening track. When I first heard it, and back when I was a wee lad and I didn't quite understand these things, I thought that, I don't know why they didn't just open the album with Caught in a Web, like open the album with the hardest thing that you could do. And I kind of grew up to know that would have been a stupid suggestion. This is an amazing opener. When that finally kicks in, I think it really sets a tone that, we're going to be doing stuff that's not just this big, just metal stuff. It's going to be kind of a majestic thing, and it's going to be kind of a metal thing, and it's going to be kind of a prog thing, and it's going to kind of weed in and out of all those things. It's probably, as far as like when you mix the drums and when you take all the pieces together, maybe Innocence Faded, but it might be the most individual proggy thing on the album without going too far into the heavy thing or too far into the, I guess the best word I could say is lame thing. I love lame music, but too far into the cheesy end of prog. It kind of sits in the middle more and gives you most of everything. So I think it's a fantastic opener.
It's looking back now and realizing, another really strong Kevin Moore lyric. You can kind of see that his perspective has changed. He has a different view, and these lyrics, whereas like the lyrics that he contributes to When Dreaming Day Unite and Images and Words are very wordy and eloquent, and there's a lot of prose there. 6 o'clock is just, like Bob Seger could have sang this lyric. It's just a freaking good rock and roll lyric, and there's a lot of Deep Purple influence on this song. I love this tune. I agree with you. It's
I would kill to hear a Bob Seger cover of this song.
But you know what I mean, like the road weary, like I'm going to tell the story about this guy who's got to get up and go to work every day. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's
No, I know what you mean.
We're not quoting Shakespeare here. I'm just telling you that it's hard to get out of bed sometimes. But speaking of kind of the piggyback on what you said, so 6 o'clock was the heaviest thing Dream Theater had ever done until Caught in a Web started. And then again, the bar sets. Oh my God, Carl, is there a more freaking awesome intro than the beginning of Caught in a Web? And P.S., that is the best synth patch Dream Theater has in their catalog. And I wish somebody could figure out how to bring it back into their records. Tell me about Caught in a Web.
This, to date, we're talking 94, so I would have been like 11 or 12. I wasn't like a super huge music fan until about this time anyway. Caught in a Web was the heaviest song I'd ever heard.
Wow.
To that point, which, it's kind of sad when you think about it now, but at the time I didn't know any better. The riff was fantastic, and it's such like an aggressive, because I don't know, because even in a 6 o'clock, I don't think you got, up until now, you haven't really gotten, this aggressive vocal attack by James Labrie, and now, not listening to Images and Words first, I wouldn't have thought this. But had Images and Words been the first thing that I heard by Dream Theater, I probably would have been completely blown away by the time I got to Caught in a Web, because
sounds like a different singer.
He attacks it. Like, he doesn't just sing that. He like hits that song with his throat, and it's freaking awesome. The lyrics are fantastic. This might be the pinnacle of great lyrics for these guys. Maybe some select tracks off of Falling Into Infinity, in my opinion, but the lyrics on all over this album, but this Caught in a Web might be my favorite lyric off the album. I think it's fantastic.
I might be mistaken, but I want to say, James Labrie and John Petrucci are co-credited as lyricists on this. It might be the only song that's split like
right.
that.
No, you're right. It's the only one on this album where the lyric credits were shared between anybody.
So, Caught in a Web is amazing. Track 3 is a song that I didn't really enjoy when I first heard it, and it grew on me, and now I think it's probably one of the standout things on the track. Innocence Faded, very strong Rush influence, has an amazing coda at the end that kind of just brings back this musical theme where they kind of tie up the whole song with this instrumental section that's just brilliant. One of John Petrucci's best guitar solos. I still can't play it note for note, and I've been trying for years. It's just so nuanced. And James LaBrie, probably the highest note he's ever sung on record, so he nails this again. Lyrically, John Petrucci contributes to the lyrics, and the song kind of deals with, obviously, the idea of losing innocence, but a lot of people, and even he's said this in interviews, that it kind of touches upon what he felt like was a dissolving relationship with him and Kevin Moore. They had been friends since they were kids. Tell me about Innocence Faded.
Petrucci was on fire with lyrics on this album. He did. I think. Most of the best lyrics on the album definitely, I think, came from Petrucci. This one, This is one of those songs where I played it all the time, and everybody I knew just thought it was cheesy, and nobody I knew even thought this band was cool, let alone this song. There was just like an element of cheese to it that nobody I knew could get behind except you. Girls I dated, friends I had, even friends I had that were really into Dream Theater, for some reason, were really into Scenes from a Memory, just couldn't get into this. Maybe it was the whole theater geek thing, but the notes that LaBrie hits on this are insane. So we get caught in a web where you get this new kind of singer. He's attacking. He's aggressive. He's got this grind to his throat and to his tone. And then he gets into this, and he's like classic James LaBrie, but like on steroids. Now he's not just singing into the sky. He's like singing into the stratosphere. And it was awesome to hear on Score him revisit this and nail the tune like mad crazy.
Which version do you like better? Do you like the Score version?
I like live versions of pretty much everything better. Just because I love the live thing. I love the environment where everything sounds more raw. Anything can go wrong. Usually they play it a little too fast live. I always get a kick out of that. So I'll take the live version if it's good. Up until that, I don't think I heard too many live versions of this tune that were awesome. It's
no.
Not,
I was very nervous when I saw it on the back of the CD that they had done this song, and I was very pleasantly surprised.
Oh. Yes, and how old was he when we finally get the Score? Because here he's what, in his 20s?
Mid to late 40s.
Yeah, so, it obviously, it's insane that a 20-year-old man can sing like this in general, So I'm not going to say that it's one thing to do this in your 20s, because it really isn't. It's an amazing thing to do in your 20s. But to also be able to do that in your 40s, it was insane. So, you're right. This is one of my favorite solos from John Petrucci, too. It's not necessarily their most like individually amazing song. Aside from the solo and the vocal, you're not going to get anything out of this that is the best noodling from all these musicians. This is an example of one of their really trim songs, right? It's very prog. There's a lot going on, but everybody's kind of they're playing all within these confines of this tune. You're right. It's a very Rush kind of influenced tune. It's one of my favorites, and it's one of the reasons that I love this album so much.
The next track is the nearly 7-minute long instrumental Erotomania, the first part of, like you said, you checked earlier, the Mind Beside Itself trilogy or suite. Erotomania is a instrumental that they kind of developed out of jamming over the Images and Words tour. If anybody has the Live from Tokyo VHS tape that I still have, yes, I have VHS tapes. There's a very cool section in that where they're kind of jamming on the main riff of this, and it kind of turns into something else. You also hear pieces of The Mirror. You hear little pieces of this album. This is, I think, one of the things that benefited this, and something they got away from on later albums is, I think, when you're writing on the road and kind of trying things out on stage, it just makes the material want to be lean and mean, because you got to play the damn stuff over and over again, and I think that really helps here. Carl, what are your thoughts on this instrumental?
This might have actually been the first instrumental rock track I heard in music, period. I don't think that wasn't really a thing among anything I listened to, and my foray into progressive.
There were no
music
instrumentals on Nevermind. I don't remember hearing any, at least. So,
yeah, right. It wasn't a big thing for the Smashing Pumpkins, but and Alabama, they weren't really an instrumental band, no. So this was it was amazing. I at this point, I'd been playing in school. I'd been playing classical music, a bit, and it was something that I'd always listened to, so it's not like I was saying, instrumental music in general, it's impossible. It's never been done before. But it was heavy. The production was fantastic. The riffs were solid. The lead work was great. This is the perfect example of what like an instrumental track for a prog band should be. It kind of showcases everybody, and not in just a needlessly noodly kind of way. I mean, the main riff is a riff, you know. Kevin Moore, he does some stuff on it, but you can certainly tell that his specialty is this, the environment, right? His specialty is the ambiance. Yeah, the atmosphere. That's a way better word than ambiance.
Store for lovers.
Yeah, so you... Yeah. Yes. I've never been there. Other people go there, not me. But amazing musical, amazing instrumental piece, and it kind of goes seamlessly into the next one, and it gets reprised a little bit too. But fantastic tune. I love it.
Yeah, it's one of the only. I'm not a big fan of instrumentals. This is one of the only Dream Theater instrumentals that I regularly don't skip over. You know, when we get to scenes,
well, their other instrumentals became so blocky, we're gonna do like the lead thing here, and then the guitar, then the keyboard, then the unison thing, and then do it again. This was very different.
Yeah, and it's hard because when you listen, you know, the best instrumentals I feel like should be able to be songs with vocals. When you listen to a song like Dance of Eternity, it's just kind of like at some point sometimes I'm listening to that record, I'm just like, after Home, I'm like, I just don't want to listen to that. I just want to hear, you know what I mean? Like, I don't need 8 minutes of, you know, and I feel like this is different. This is setting up the motifs and themes that are going to come. And so that takes us to track 5, which is Voices. A longtime fan favorite. Mike Portnoy is on record for a long time saying this was his favorite song by the band. It's just a genius 9-minute song that just never feels... It's one of those songs that it doesn't feel as long as it is, and you just wish it wouldn't end. And it probably has one of James LaBrie's best vocal performances. Again, lyrics from John Petrucci. These lyrics, very, very poetic, dealing with, you know, mental illness and things of that ilk. And, you know, when I was younger and I first heard this song, it immediately resonated with me that, like, this guy is an amazing lyricist. These words are genius. I cannot write like this, you know, and it kind of set a bar for me. What are your thoughts on Voices?
It's got out of all of the, it's not like my favorite individual guitar solo from him, but my favorite solo performance.
And he played it live in the studio.
Yeah, that's insane. My favorite solo performance by him, even if this isn't my favorite solo performance by Petrucci is on the live scenes, him doing the solo for this tune. Yeah. I don't know what it is about the live environment that just kind of kicked it up like an extra notch. I just like, in fact, actually, that's my favorite performance from the band is listening to Erotomania through Voices on live scenes. Maybe my second favorite would have been the Change of Seasons from there, but again, the one thing I always notice is like Voices never seemed to me like a 9-minute song. Like to me, Voices always seemed like a 6 or a 5-minute song. Erotomania always to me seemed like it was like an 8 or 9-minute song. Like I always thought like that was a great journey that they just took us on, and this is a great little tune. It's kind of like the opposite way around. The lyrics on this tune are fantastic. This song just gets me jazzed up, man. Whenever I hear this song, I'm like, why can't I write a song like that? Why can't I record a song like that? It might not be my favorite song on the album, but I probably listen to it more than any other tune on this album.
The thing I'll add is that when we talk about like what music means to us, like I listened to this record when I was 14, and just last week I listened to this all the way through. I got up, you know, one morning and I went for a run and, you know, trying to get my headset for this podcast. And I was listening to this song, and like there are moments, especially like in the bridge and the final section of the song, that like give me goosebumps. And it's very interesting to me that something that could give me goosebumps 22 years ago, and then 500 listens later, still give me goosebumps at the same spot. It's like a really interesting like thing that I can't think of anything else in life that can do that. You know, here's this thing, and it like connects me to all these former versions of myself with these really strong reactions. Very few artists or very little music have I ever listened to that's been able to do that for that long. So it's an amazing song, and its staying power is also kind of amazing because I still get something out of listening to it. So that takes us to the next track, which is the final song of this trilogy, the very acoustic Silent Man, a song that John Petrucci kind of composed himself. Cool little song. I kind of like the bridge and stuff. The way they reprise the motifs from Erotomania. It's not the strongest chorus. I've always kind of felt like the band has a hard time with these songs because I feel like they want to do like Radiohead or something along those lines, and it just doesn't ever really work. It's an okay song. I usually don't skip it, but it's probably the one thing on the record I could take or leave. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is the kind of tune that I don't know how much Kevin Moore was or wasn't involved in this kind of a tune. I would imagine this is the kind of thing that you would need a Kevin Moore for, because none of the guys in the band, they're not musically like artsy fartsy. And I don't say arts like I know I'm not a big radio hand, and when I say artsy fartsy with Radiohead, I'm usually making a dig at them, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there's ways you could do artsy fartsy. I think Fate's Warning's got amazing artsy fartsy elements for obvious reasons.
Interesting, because Kevin Moore plays keyboards on all the records I like from them. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I mean. Like, so they don't have that bone. I mean, they do artsy fartsy with lyrics really well on many of their albums, but musically, you're right. It's not like the tune's not good. It's not like it couldn't be a good melody. The chorus isn't super strong, even though you've got a lot of musical value to work with. But it's not my favorite tune on here. I guess I like the bridge, like you said. I guess I just don't dig the tune. But I mean, it's certainly not a bad song. It's just maybe my least favorite song on this album. I wouldn't call it like. I mean, it might be the reason why I give this album a 9 instead of a 10. You know what I'm saying?
And it definitely is a song that you could imagine having benefited from more Kevin Moore. But apparently, by this point, they wrote the record or finished writing the record together in the studio, and then kind of went to track. And while Kevin Moore's leaving at the end was kind of a shock to the band, they've all said in interviews that they could tell that he was becoming more and more distant, and that. Whereas he had been very opinionated in the past and had very strong opinions on like arrangements, he all of a sudden like didn't fight and didn't really care about what happened. So I think everybody knew something was up, and I think that's kind of where you miss him, is on moments like this. The next track is The Mirror. Now, The Mirror features a very strong lyric contribution from Mike Portnoy, a very strong lyric that I don't think at the time I realized what it was going to lead to, but The Mirror kind of explored, what he was considering a battle with alcoholism at the time, that would turn into like a complete epic journey, and also like a recovery process for him. This song is something they developed while writing on tour, kind of grew out of an instrumental. Is a very heavy song, very metal, not very melodic, but I think it's a genius composition, and I freaking love this song. Carl, tell me about The Mirror.
This is my favorite lyric contribution from Portnoy. This is, in my opinion, the top of what he's capable of lyrically. This is one of those tunes that kind of dances in and out of being kind of like literal with the lyrics, but it kind of like metaphor with him too, like using really literal statements, but you're not getting the full picture of the context. It's not like telling a story like Bob Seger does with lyrical things. It's got more of like a Jerry Cantrell vibe, where I say something literal, but I don't mean something literal when I say it. And Portnoy does great lyrics in other aspects. This just happens to be my favorite. The tune is just heavy. I love that riff. I love how heavy the tune is. Again, just really showcases that there are more moments where, and I wish they would kind of go back to these, where you can do a little simpler and be a little trimmer and it still be heavy without kind of blocking off how you do your arrangements, and just having noodle sections. You can do noodling, you can do solos, and then you can do this. In my opinion, it might be like the most consistent like tune on the album. I love it. I think it's a seamlessly fantastic song.
So The Mirror segues seamlessly into Lie, which is a kind of a song they built out of a riff that was originally a piece of the end of The Mirror that, James LaBrie is famously quoted as saying that he, kind of pushed them to turn it into a song that he felt like it was a strong enough riff. And so they developed Lie into its own song. It also became a single off of the record. Interestingly, Lie, is this kind of trim 4.5-minute song, and then at the end they tack back on, a 2-minute like instrumental that ties it back into the mirror. That instrumental, I think, features one of the best, again, examples of what Kevin Moore brought to the band, in that it has a huge crescendo build up that is just a feedback, and then kind of Kevin Moore's super sparse, haunting like piano line comes in and just crushes on top of this riff. This is this example of a song that every time it's played live with a different keyboardist, I cringe, because for the love of God, it would just kill Jordan Rudess to just sit there and hit those 5 notes. No, he has to play a solo, or he has to, and I think this is what they don't get, or they didn't get. And so this would, when people ask me like, why are you like Kevin Moore so much, I would just say, like, this is an example of what I like, and different strokes for different strokes. But listen to the version of this from live scenes and tell me if you don't cringe when you hear where there should just be this sparse keyboard line. Tell me about Lie.
Yeah, I don't know that if Jordan Rudess tried to do it like this, that he could. I mean, everybody's got to play on their strengths, and that's just not one of them for him, I guess. You know what I mean? So
yeah, for sure, fair enough.
I almost maybe would cringe more if he tried. I would like to see him try, because he is an amazingly talented individual. But talent comes in many forms, and again, the environment, the atmosphere of a tune was just something he excelled at. The lyrics on here, it might not be my favorite lyrics. They're certainly good, but for how it fits in the tune, I mean, they're kind of haunting. It's kind of a haunting tune too. Heavy but haunting. This is one of the primary pinnacle reasons where I miss Kevin Moore. He doesn't do a lot of lead work on this album. His solos on Images and Words are also reasons that I miss him so much, because he is very lyrical. And I think that element, kind of like anchoring, one element to kind of anchor the band into something a little simpler but awesome and amazing, would just be great. But obviously we don't have that anymore, and to each their own. Again, not my favorite song on the album. It's certainly, for me, it's kind of in the middle, but this song makes me miss Kevin Moore so bad.
Yeah, for sure. And then that brings us to track 9, which is another one of those songs that kind of grew on me over time, Lifting Shadows Off a Dream. A very poetic, lyrical contribution from John Myung. The song's got this is like another side of Dream Theater that you hadn't seen before. They're able to do this kind of almost U2-esque atmospheric thing that they blend in with the prog rock. This song has an amazing like solo section. Again, super understated. It's really about the space in between the notes that works to its advantage. Amazing lyrics. James LaBrie kills it with his vocals. What are your thoughts on this song?
This was one of my favorite tunes by them. This might be my third or so favorite song on the album. Now there was a time when I thought it was my favorite song on the album, and then I grew chest hair and testicles. This is no. All kidding aside, the lyrics on this are amazing. This might be my second favorite lyrical contribution from John Myung, if not my favorite. This is something that Petrucci, for a while, and you hear this a lot on a lot of the unreleased, the demos that they eventually released and turned into songs like To Live Forever. You hear Petrucci's work on the guitar during the verse, and this thing where he's playing something kind of complicated and proggy, but he's not noodling. Petrucci's one of those guys, and this is a really good example of, he can do the ultra noodle thing, and then he can kind of do this let's play in the pocket and get kind of atmospheric thing with it, and he kind of does this almost not at all anymore. But the way that they kind of played this, you could have strummed this whole song. You really could have, but you don't have to. He finds this other really proggy way to play it. LaBrie is singing on this. It's fantastic. The song structure is amazing. This is another example of, you're right, it's kind of like a U2 thing, and I can kind of hear some Rush in it, but this is another example of a really trim song that's really proggy, and it fits. It's not like the other metal tunes on here. It's not one of those super heavy tunes on here. It is very Dream Theater classic, and it fits really well on here. And this is another tune that I just wish that they did more of. And again, Moore's contribution on the tune might be kind of a little sparse, but gosh darn, it's absolutely perfect.
And that brings us to Scarred, a song that features, again, some of my favorite John Petrucci guitar work, what I consider to be perhaps his best lyric, song that is super poignant and powerful on a lot of fronts. John Petrucci, you know, he had an amazing ability. He was born and raised a Catholic, and being somebody who was raised Catholic myself, there's a very interesting thing that I think only people who grew up in the Catholic household can get, where there's this mixture of like, thousands-year-old repression and guilt mixed with like heavy-handed, issues of faith and thoughts on all of that, and it kind of all works together. And I feel like he does a really good job of like bringing in this strong religious imagery without things feeling spiritual. Like it's almost like from a different perspective that he's doing it. And this song, a lot of his early lyrics, I think, kind of do that very well. And it was always intriguing to me, and it was something I picked up on. I was like, ooh, like that's an interesting way to throw in that like really like obscure reference to like the Bible or this or that. Like, what a clever lyricist, like. This song, whereas Images and Words, I feel like the different influences of the band were just kind of smashed together, and it's genius. I feel like Awake is them kind of solidifying their sound. I don't hear Rush mixed with Metallica. I just kind of hear Dream Theater, and this is a good example of that. This song, it's just more seamless. It just sounds like a confident band writing, and James LaBrie, it's probably his strongest vocal ever recorded. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think earlier in the cast I said that I thought 6 O'Clock might have been the one song example where they do everything on this album like in the 1-2, and I actually think I'm going to walk that back, because when I think about it, Scarred is probably the shining example of, I think, a little bit of everything that they do on this album, and that what they're kind of capable up to so far probably better represents that. It's heavy, it's atmospheric, it's dark, but it's got some kind of brighter moments to it. The lyrics are, there's a lot of words to it. I mean, it's a very wordy tune. I think that this really also goes a lot to James LaBrie's talent to take a lot of words, which Dream Theater tends to like to write a lot of words, and
yes.
He's really good. He's got like that Meatloaf quality of like, I can take a crap ton of words and just like put them in somewhere and make it work, and he does that really well here. There's amazing live versions of this tune. There's some horrible live versions of this tune, but this might be my like full on favorite tune from the album. That's a tall order if I had to pick one favorite, but God, I love this song. After I realized that I was a male and I stopped thinking Lifting Shadows was like the best tune on the album, I probably listened to this one. There was a period where like I would just put this album on and then listen to this and then start the album over again, because this was like the first track I wanted to hear.
Yeah, it's such a good tune. And then the last track on the album is Space Divest, the infamous Space Divest. So Kevin Moore brings this song into the band. He had been recording a lot of music. A lot of these demos would end up being released as the first Chroma Key release after he would leave the band. But this was one of the songs that he recorded with vocals and everything and presented it to the band. And I think they were all so shocked at how complete the demo was that they kind of just said, okay, like let's just record it as it is. And they didn't really do too much to it. I think I always felt, and I know this is a divisive song, but I always felt the Space Divest was like the perfect ending to this record, because it was so atmospheric and haunting, and it had a lot of really cool stuff going on, but again, it was sparse. I felt like it was just the perfect kind of like calm after this huge storm that was the record. The band famously didn't play it live for like forever because he wasn't, blah, blah, blah. All the stuff, we all know the damn song, for all the hoopla I got, I never understood, because it's not the best song in the world. It's just a cool little song at the end of the record. But if you're a Kevin Moore fan and like his music and like what he did after it, this was kind of a sign of what he was going to do upon leaving the band. What are your thoughts on Space Divest?
Do you remember there was a good while where you would always tell me how awesome this song was, and I would always tell you I thought it was lame? Mm-hmm. Yeah, for some reason...
I definitely championed it.
Yeah, and you were right. I mean, I for a long time, I just thought, like, I cannot, I'm glad it's at the end, so I don't have to skip it. I could just turn it off. But I'm completely wrong, though. I mean, this again is... I know that this is probably the most of more that we get, and now when I listen to it, I'm like, no, this song is absolutely genius. And I think I got this quote I remember reading a long time ago about the meaning behind the song, which again was started off kind of silly, but then molded into something that was really interesting. But I mean, the lyrics are good. There's a lot. I think what it was is at the time I just wasn't big into sampling. I'm like, you're all musicians. Why the hell are you doing this? But great tune. I was certainly wrong to kind of cast it aside so often. Now when I listen to this, I just get kind of sad because I'm like, I just wish there was more of this on, I'm okay. I don't miss him as much on Falling Into Infinity because I think that Sherinian does a very similar thing, being a simpler keyboardist, but really talented within that thing that he does and kind of rooting people. But I think when you get to scenes where I'm sorry, I wish there was something like Space Divest on here, or at least elements of that throughout the album. So this again, it's a tune that I used to not like so much that now I do know is a fantastic song, and I'm glad that it's on here.
Yeah, I think just real quick to highlight, I know I gush about Kevin Moore, and I don't mean to, because I know he's an acquired taste, but the genius of his lyrics, and you get a lot of this, especially on the OSI albums, and if anybody hasn't checked them out, I strongly urge you, if you have any interest in more of Kevin Moore's music, that's probably where I would start next. He writes, the story of the song is he, carried around a magazine with him, and he really liked this chick who was wearing a Space Divest, and then he realized it was such an interesting commentary that he was like into somebody. He had this connection with something on a page, but if that person was real, like the connection would disappear. And the genius is that like there's the literal, like, kind of what you were saying about Mike Portnoy. There's this literal interpretation that you can see him like flipping through a magazine, and the lyrics are very literal, while he's sitting on a tour bus or whatever. But then it's also it's analogous to kind of like his entire thought on the world. Upon the finishing of this album, Kevin Moore announced to the band that he was leaving. That he had kind of grown tired of, he had been in the band for 6 years or 7 years and saw it rise to fame and went on tour. And I think the touring was really what kind of took its toll on him. And as somebody who's done a little bit of it myself, I can tell you it's not for everybody. It's an acquired taste. It's a different way of living. And he was not interested in not only in making this kind of music, he wasn't interested in doing anything this way anymore. So he ends up selling all of his possessions and very famously kind of just hitting the road with no destination in mind, 25 years old, and just kind of going to hit the road and see what happens. And the rest of the band was shocked, I think, to probably different degrees depending on who it was. But he wasn't even there for the mixing. So I know that there's a couple interviews from back in the day where he expressed some kind of like almost sadness over how it was mixed, because his parts are really far back at certain points. But I know Mike Portnoy has said very famously, like, hey, he was leaving the band, so we didn't see why his opinion should matter at that point. And I could see both sides, especially if somebody's like, I'm leaving. Well, I'm not going to ask you what your opinions are on the, on the mix of this song you're not even going to be playing. So
you're right.
What are your thoughts on Kevin Moore's leaving the band? I know we talked a lot about it, obviously, because it's all over the record. But what are your thoughts about how he left and kind of what he's done since?
I don't know a lot about how he left. I know that everybody's got to do what they got to do. I don't know what the relationship with them was like around that leaving, or what it was like even after they left. I know that I think Mike Portnoy took it. If I remember my reading and my rumors right, I know that Mike Portnoy, I think, took it kind of the hardest. And I think there's songs that they have that kind of reference this, but it's sad. It was an element of the band that I liked, one of the elements I liked the most, and I kind of got enough of a replacement in Sherinian. Not that Sherinian is like Kevin Moore, but he does fill, like I said a little earlier, he does fill that gap of something simpler to kind of anchor everything down, So it's, I mean, he had a great career post that. His contributions to Fate's Warning were great. The OSI albums were I think there was, 2 or 3 of those? Or more?
There's 4 OSI albums. There's
4?
There's 3 Chroma Key records.
Gosh, yeah.
He's done a lot of guest starring.
Chroma Key ones were good.
The thing that was confusing to me, though, real quick, is that he left because he wanted to do music a different way. And then as a fan at the time, he immediately shows up on the next Fates Warning album as the keyboardist. And I remember thinking like, and it's genius. He does it's all the same keyboard sounds. If you want to hear Kevin Moore, listen to A Pleasant Shade of Grey and Disconnected. He is on both of those records, and they very much carry all of his hallmarks. So he obviously still could make and do prog rock. I've always wondered, and it's you're not going to find it anywhere. He doesn't talk about it at all in interviews, but I always wondered what else was there. And was it really just as simple as I don't want to play prog rock, or was there a little bit more to it? I suspect there had to be a little bit more. Sorry to cut you off.
No. I'm glad that you did, because I wanted to get to that point too. It's not like what he did. Obviously, the OSI stuff and the chroma key stuff is very different than the prog elements, the prog thing that he was doing with Dream Theater. And I would say the thing that I like about his contributions to Fates Warning is those 2 or 3 albums they were very different than the other Fates Warnings albums. And it seemed like, so it like what he did with them was still prog, and it was still kind of like a bordering on the metal thing, but very different than what he was doing with Dream Theater. I don't know. I agree with you. There usually is something else there. I doubt. I doubt that they would have kicked him out of the band. I doubt that they would have been like, we need a more talented keyboardist. You know what I mean? So I don't know if he just wanted to leave or if there was some relationship turmoil between them. That's always hard to know, and I always want to know, but I'm not nosy, and I kind of just gossipy, but I don't really know why he left. I don't know if I can take him just at his word. Relationships and bands are complicated, but I'm at least glad he continued working,
For sure,
and he
yes.
continued working on great stuff too. And you can kind of see, he's just not like an ancillary character in something where he was just there to contribute the keys, and then that was it. He is an amazing artist, and I think an artist in the truest sense of the word. He takes this thing that he does, and he just wants to make really good art with it, and I think he succeeds wonderfully at it.
Well, and it's, at this point, we're going on almost 25 years since it's happened. So obviously Jordan Rudess has been in the band, 4 times as long as Kevin Moore was. It's such a footnote kind of in their story, but at the time it felt like a huge change, and we'll talk about it when we get to the next record, later on down the road, but it was a huge change. And it's a change that I think when fans talk about what they like about Dream Theater, it's hard for it to still not. It's amazing that the contributions on these first 3 records really, are still kind of creating waves, 25 years later. That being said, what's your thoughts on the production and the mix of it? The record has it sounds a lot different than Images and Words. It sounds a lot different than all their records. It has a very 90s metal sound with kind of a reverbed out drums and all of that, but the production is nice and full and lush, and no triggered drums. You get to hear Mike Portnoy's real snare this time, and I feel like there's a lot of room to breathe, and when you turn it up, it just sounds good. It's not brick-walled. What are your thoughts on the production on this record?
I'm glad that he didn't trigger his drums, because triggering a drummer like Mike Portnoy is like gosh darn auto-tuning John Legend.
Well, it wasn't his choice on the first record. It was on Images.
Yeah, and it's stupid. You don't need to correct somebody or trigger or give I guess training wheels to somebody who's that talented. Like I hear Alicia Keys, right? And I hear all these talented singers, and I'm like, why are you pitch correcting them to be completely computerized perfect? You don't need to do that, and you don't need to trigger Mike Portnoy's drums. So his performances in the most natural way that they can be is exactly what we need. He's very consistent. It's not like he's not like his hits and his performances are up and down. The atmosphere on it's very dark, and the production to get it to that point, whatever they did to give that kind of like a darker color to the album, was fantastic. We didn't get it on the first one, and we didn't get another dark production until we get to 6 Degrees, so they skipped 2 albums of something that was a little brighter and a little lighter. The guitar tones were obviously the heaviest that they've been, and you're right. Not brick-walled, not kind of compressed and condensed down. My only critique on it, and this is just hard to do, it's hard to mix really low bass guitar.
You don't hear the bass.
Strings.
Yeah.
That you do, but you don't hear like the individual attack as much. And this is why I'm so glad that they eventually started really producing and releasing those tiered bass guitars where you get the lower strings longer so they can be thinner, and then the tension's there. Because here they're just floppy. They do a much better job of it on Falling Into Infinity and on. So it's not easy. I mean, the reason that I don't detune stuff, which would work much better with my throat, the reason honestly I don't is because I can't barely hear my bass and I don't know how to mix it that way, so I just don't. I'm like, I'll figure this out in standard. But that's my only critique. You still hear the bass though. Like the low end is still there carrying it.
There's just no articulation to it. It's just, I'll agree with you. It's muddy at points, but I like it. I think it works on this record.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It does. And he doesn't have to noodle around on here like crazy to kind of show off how good he is too. And the lyrical contribution, this might be the most solid record lyrically from one end to the other.
I think it hands down is. It's a record I still reference. It saddens me when I listen to a song like The Count of Tuscany to think that at one point the space was reserved for, these really like thought out ruminations on like mortality and life, and now I'm just going to tell a story. Because I don't know what else to say. It feels like at times, you have this fire and this energy when you're young, and it's sad to think that and I know it's natural for people to lose it, but it feels like at times when you're listening to the lyrics on the later records that maybe that's been lost a bit. And I don't know why. And I guess Carl, you go to work every day, I go to work every day. When we make music, it's completely in our free time and that's all. But I just have a hard time understanding how, like, getting up every day and making music as a job, you can't stay motivated and hungry. But they're not the only band to struggle with it. I mean, it is what it is. But especially for Petrucci, that's the kind of head scratcher, And
I don't know what this is because the hardest times in my life where I've had writing lyrics were when I was younger, and not that I couldn't write words strung together that maybe sound kind of mysterious because I think anybody can do that, but I didn't find myself able to write lyrics with any real meaning or conviction until like I got older, maybe like within the last like 3 or so years. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what it's like to be really good at writing lyrics, and then you get to the Count of Tuscany where, your other lyrics told stories. This tells a story, but for some reason this story blows. The story doesn't really blow. Like, it's actually kind of an interesting story. Anecdotally, it's something that I would repeat, but somehow you're telling it really sucks, and I have no idea why.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know how to define whether or not a musician's hungry anymore. I get, and I'm usually more rational when we do these podcasts because I'm in kind of a calmer state and I've relaxed a bit. But I do get into entitled fan mode, like all music fans, especially geek culture fans. We tend to do this, and sometimes I think, why can't they just go back to being better at this, that, or the other? And obviously they have no responsibility to. Maybe they're all really happy. Maybe this is exactly what they want to do, and that's fine. I just really wish we could get some what I would consider better lyrics and then a little less noodling out of them, because I know that they're capable of doing so much more than just playing a bajillion notes a second at the same time.
I will completely echo what you're saying about entitled fan mode, and everything I'm saying is with all due respect to those who have accomplished way more than I have. It is more...
Yeah, at the end of the day, they're them and we're us. So.
Not a personal indictment on the human being, just a subjective observation on my part as a fan.
Yes.
As a fan who spent a lot of money and feels entitled to at least have the opinion shared with you. So that being said,
absolutely.
The final thing I'll say is this album to me is genius from start to finish. And when I listen to it, and then I listen to The Astonishing, which I was not a fan of, or not a big fan of, I wonder how, as the artist, you don't listen to Awake and think, man, wow, how do we do that again? Because, like, this thing we just did, like, how are you not aware of it? But maybe you are. That's enough of that. Let's get to the wrapping this up here with some fun stuff and kind of keeping the conversation on Awake. Carl, what is your favorite performance from each member of the band on this record? What's the best drum performance? What's the best guitar song? Why don't you give me your favorites for these guys?
My favorite drum performance, I think, is going to the drums one's the hardest because he's not all over this album like he is. There really isn't one tune where he's just like really flailing away. I'm gonna have to say 6 O'Clock. I think the way that he really does. I mean, 6 O'Clock is a great tune, but the riff in there, it's not like the kind of riff that really drives a song, like Smashing Pumpkin, like Billy Corgan would be so good at, like, here's a riff and the whole song's going to be this riff. Really, he is the only thing gluing all those kind of sparse parts together, and I think that's one of the most amazing things about the tune. Vocally, I have to go with Scarred. For Labrie, because he does the singing thing. He does James Labrie classic, but he also does the I'm attacking the microphone with my throat thing. And
is it great. You that told me that final section of the song is like the Wheel of Fortune theme?
Yeah, that dun, 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 dun. It's not the exact same, but it always reminded me of it. I would have to say for Petrucci, I gotta go with his solo on Voices. It's so good.
Yeah.
His performance all over that tune is so good. You would think that I would want to say for more that I'd want to say Space Divest, but I honestly think that like the atmosphere that he brings to Caught in a Web, I don't know if that song. I think obviously Space Divest wouldn't be what it is if Kevin Moore wasn't playing on it, but it's like a 90% keyboard tune. Caught in a Web, I honestly think if you take what the sparse contributions are to it, it wouldn't be that interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, did you give me a bass line? What's your bass?
Oh, shoot. No, I didn't. That one's also really hard because he's not really all over it. So I would say definitely Lifting Shadows, because I think what he's doing on that, he's not like blowing away with, one notes after, just blasting away with like big lines, but the way he kind of plays that and the way him and Petrucci kind of play off of each other in that, especially between the intro and the verse, I think is fantastic. So I'm going to go with Lifting Shadows for Myung.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, and I think drums is easy. I think I'm going to go with Caught in a Web. I just love his use of toms. He does a lot of things on Caught in a Web that he hasn't done yet in the band, I think because the song is so groove heavy. It's a different kind of sound, and Portnoy just nails it. Guitar, God, man, that's an easy one. Voices, just Petrucci's solo just kills in that song. And I'm probably going to say for Labrie, I'm going to give him Voices as well. I like Lifting Shadows is a good choice. I'm going to actually say Scarred. I think I love that opening bass line. I love the groove of it. I think Myung just kind of nails that song with the pocket. And then the keys, I'm going to say Voices. Everything Kevin Moore does in that song is perfect. Find me a passage, a 2-minute section from Jordan Rudess where he only plays 5 notes over and over again. It's just, he just can't do it. And it's okay. Like you said, because Kevin Moore can't play unison runs and can't do all the other stuff he can do and wouldn't wanted to. But I really appreciate how understated that first verse is. I think it's brilliant. And it's the type of dynamics that the band unfortunately kind of loses as they kind of started to embrace the modern production on their later records. That kind of soft and loud dynamic kind of fades away a little bit. What's your favorite song on the record?
I'm going to go with Scarred.
All right. Wow, Scarred. You could almost pick any one of these songs. I wouldn't argue.
Oh, yeah, you really could. Yeah. Except Silent Man, because the song kind of sucks.
Yeah.
It's the, you know what? I think if anybody gets the joke about the Stoned Age, and if you don't, you need to watch it to get the joke. I think if every album had a Don't Fear the Reaper, every time we do an album, we got to pick a Don't Fear the Reaper. What is the Don't Fear the Reaper track? And that would be the Silent Man here.
Yes, I totally agree. What's your... My favorite song is going to be Voices, by the way. Is this... where does this album stack up for you in Dream Theater's catalog? Is it your favorite record? Do you put it in your top 3? Is it middle of the pack? How has this album held up?
No,
for you?
every time we're done doing one of the podcasts on the album, I want to say it's my favorite record when I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm still probably going to go with Falling Into Infinity right now as my favorite. And I wouldn't even say it was the best. Out of the first 5 albums, after Images, this one, Falling to Infinity, Scenes from Memory, and 6 Degrees, I might even say that this is the best one. It maybe is my third favorite. I mean, it's a 9 in a pool of 9s and 10s.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I'm still probably going, like, as far as my favorites, maybe Falling, 6 Degrees, this one, Images and Scenes. But that being said, if you were to ask me which is the best one, I'd probably say this one. It's the most, I think I think this one took the most art to do. I think that it's the trimmest one, which, I mean, that's hard to do. When you're really good, like these guys, I think it's really hard to do this kind of more in the pocket thing and it still be prog and it still be prog metal. So it's to me is the most impressive, I think, of their first 5 albums, but not my favorite.
So it's one of those things that on any given day, you could get me to say 6 Degrees, Scenes from a Memory, Images and Words, or this album, is Dream Theater's best album. Just because I listened to this last week, so I've just recently run through it. Man, I was really enjoying it, and I was thinking to myself, this is probably their top to bottom best record. Is it the one I want to listen to the most? That kind of depends on what month of the year it is, but it's definitely and we're really splitting hairs because like I said, there's 4 or 5 that we could put in there. I wonder though, and this is kind of more of a macro point to the conversation. Now that the band is making their 14th record, and I don't think anybody would tell you that any of their last 5 or 6 albums is their best album. Maybe somebody would, but I think most longtime fans feel strongly about these first 3 or 4 albums. Is it just that is it one of those things that when you make 20 records, nobody likes the 20th record as much as the first one, you can't win? Or is it that the band is just not making stuff that stacks up? You know what I mean? Is it the fans or is it the band? And do you think they're capable of doing this again and doing something this good?
I think they're capable. I mean, they're physically certainly capable. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that from what I get from Dream Theater fans, you and I are seemingly in the minority, and I think that they've gained more fans. The more their muscles got bigger, their beards got longer, and their tunes got more noodly.
Yeah.
And I swear to God, eventually, instead of his guitar looking like a shield, the Music Man's just going to make him a guitar out of a shield, and that's what he's going to walk on stage with.
As a Music Man player and a person who is a Music Man dealer, I have to be honest with you, I hate the new Petrucci guitars. I think they're hideous. They don't feel like guitars. And when I was told that John Petrucci's inspiration was a sports car, I knew something was wrong. When they told me 3 years ago, he's coming up with a new guitar and it's inspired by the car he drives, I remember thinking to myself, what the fuck does a car have to do with your guitar? This is so stupid. What is wrong with you? Play a Telly.
Yeah, right. Get a Telecaster for Pete's sake. I think that they're capable of it in a way. In another way, I just don't think they're capable of it. I think that it might be a challenge that to them is boring. To me, I would be the most interested if they said that they were going to try to do an album like that. Maybe I don't want a repeat of it, but within that concept of let's do something a little on the simpler side, but still be really prog about it. That's the thing that I'm just not sure that they could commit to. Like you said, I don't know that Jordan Rudess can do that. I think that the genius that is Jordan Rudess is that I think his 2 hands have their own brain. And then when he puts his hands on a keyboard, they just happen to do what they want to do, and he has no control over it.
It's like 3 composers at the same time.
Right. His hands go from 0 to 60, quicker than most sports cars, and so that's okay. I don't think that they could do it, and I think that Mangini could do it though. I think Mangini could. I think that there are many times where he can kind of fit that in the pocket prog role really well. I think John Myung still has it in him. I'm just not sure that Petrucci or Rudess would do it.
Yeah, and like I said, it really I see this all the time on the forums. A lot of people, when this question gets posed, people will say, "Well, maybe you just didn't, maybe you outgrew the band, and it's not the band's fault," and that's completely fair. But I would counter that I don't think I ever outgrew the band. I think the band I'm in love with stopped making records that sounded like this. Because the fact that I'm still getting goosebumps listening to this record 25 years later, it shows that I'm still a fan of the band. I'm still listening to their music. And so it's cool. It is what it is. I think that it's one of those things that with Dream Theater 12, the self-titled, I think that was probably as close as we were going to get to this kind of record. And it's a good record, and I very much enjoyed it. They focused on Trimmer songs, and I think that's probably as close as we're going to get. I not to devolve the conversation, but I feel like the give and take that existed when you had a Mike Portnoy in the band created records we didn't like and created records we liked. But I think that the stuff we get without him in the band is just stuff that is okay. I don't hate their records. I don't like you know what I mean? And I think that's kind of something we might be missing because there's no check and balance, and that's okay.
You're never going to like everything that an artist does, and I'm okay with that. And Mike Portnoy is probably one of the major reasons that I love Dream Theater as much as I do. And he's probably one of the major reasons that there's a chunk of their sound that I didn't like. And that's okay. Yep. I am not interested really in hearing Dream Theater without the guy in it. And even if he's going to do something that I don't like sonically, I like him. I like his style. And even if I'm not going to like it, I want to hear what he's going to do. I really do. And I'm just not that big of a Mangini fan. And that's probably my own limitation. And if I listen to more stuff Mike Mangini's done, I probably would be. But I'm interested in Portnoy, Bertucci, Myung, and Labrie. That's the thing that I'm ultimately interested in, and I'll never get that again probably, and that's okay too. But
do you have any final thoughts on Awake?
Yeah, it's the pinnacle of what they could be between prog, metal, and still kind of trim and simple that I don't think we're ever going to get again. And it's sad, but it's okay because I still have this one. And hey, who's to say that they have to retread? You know what? It's a unique album, and maybe that's what makes it so good.
I know it's not technically a sophomore album, but I always view it as a sophomore album because it was the follow-up to their major label debut. And in that regard, I will always consider Awake to be perhaps the best sophomore album ever released. Yeah. When you think about how hard it is to follow up what everybody will consider to be the classic, the debut, the Pearl Jam 10,
the best sophomore album released. So initially, what comes to my noggin when I hear best sophomore albums, Awake immediately comes to my noggin.
Yep.
Garbage 2.0 comes to my noggin.
Yeah.
Purple comes to my noggin.
Yeah.
That'd be a good discussion in and of itself, Jim.
Ride the Lightning. Yeah. I feel like they took everything they did and they just jumped into the next level. And it's probably especially for Labrie and Petrucci, probably my favorite overall performances from any record is on this album. So it's just, if it's not the best sophomore album ever, it's one of the best, and it's in that conversation, and it will always immediately come to mind. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave that. I think that is.
Thank you for listening to Geek USA. Follow us on Twitter at Geek USA Podcast.